Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Tales of Home, we retell those moments, honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. The chandelier over the ballroom looked like a clutch of upside-down tumbleweeds strung with warm filament bulbs. They glowed the way Tucson does just before the sun gives up the day, honeyed, stubborn, beautiful. A jazz trio slid through blue skies, and somewhere near the bar, a server cracked the peel of an orange for a paloma, the citrus mist catching the light. I remember all of it because that's what my brain does at catalogs. I'm Nora Caldwell, archivist by trade, and on the night my daughter graduated, every small thing wrote itself down in me. The hotel was called the Sonoran Palms, a boutique place with adobe columns and a mural of saguaro in bloom. Ava sat at a long banquet table between her studio partner and her favorite professor, her mortarboard stacked on the chair behind her like a retired crown. Our family name, Mercer, was scripted in gold on a place card I'd straightened 4 times. She had promised to humor me with photos by the neon sign in the lobby later. She had promised a slow dance with her dad. Grant stood when the MC tapped the mic and invited him to speak. He was good at rooms. He wore navy that night, a suit tailored to suggest time was something he had bent into a useful shape. When he lifted his glass, the low dinner clatter dissolved as if a conductor had cut the orchestra with a raised hand. To Ava, he began smiling the way he does when he's closing a deal. To her, grit to a future that... He paused. He looked down. I watched the space between his breath and his words stretch thin as onion skin. That will happen without me. I'm moving on. I've met someone. Tonight is my goodbye. There's a particular quiet that falls when you introduce an earthquake into a room built for toasts. Chairs forgot to scrape a violin string, left its own sentence unfinished. The jazz trio stopped mid-phrase without realizing they had. Somewhere a fork hovered over a plate and never landed. I felt heat travel up the back of my neck, a flash like stepping past a kitchen oven. Then I felt something else, an evenness, a cool shelf inside me where decisions could sit without rattling. 30 years teaches you when to speak and when to move. I placed my napkin on the table in a neat square fold, found my purse by the heel of my chair, and stood. Ava. I touched her shoulder. Her eyes were wide but steady. She's always had a way of bracing like a desert plant, flexible-rooted. I kissed her temple. This is still your night. The professor across from her opened his mouth and then closed it. Mercy kept him quiet. I stepped around Grant without grazing his sleeve. The table arrangements, ocotillo and desert marigold in squat clay vases, wobbled in my periphery as the room tried to decide whether to breathe again. I set a white envelope beside Grant's salad plate. He didn't look at it at first. He was busy searching faces for a script that would put this back in his hands. Please, I said to the guests, to the staff, who had rehearsed their kindness, to the air itself, enjoy your dinner. It wasn't bravado. It was good manners, and I meant it. The carpet in the corridor had a pattern of agave rosettes. The pattern repeats every 8 steps. I'd counted on the way in, and I counted again on the way out. The elevator doors opened with a hush and reflected me back, a woman in a black dress with a simple silver chain hair pinned in a way that had taken longer than she'd admit. Behind me a murmur swelled and broke. The doors began to draw together. Oh? Nora. Grant's voice had lost its microphone polish. He pushed through the gap just before the elevator closed, the envelope pinched in his hand like it had teeth. What is this? I pressed the lobby button and watched the light turn red. A courtesy, I said, and timing. He looked down at the flap at the merciful absence of handwriting. He had always believed paper loved him. Contracts had bent for him. Deeds had turned his way. He slid a blunt finger under the seal and glanced at the first page. The blood drained from his face in a quick technical way, like a stage crew cutting the dimmers. You're unbelievable, he said. Voice low, heat surfacing again. Tonight, in front of everyone. Grant, I said soft, but even you spoke first. The elevator landed. The doors opened to the lobby's cool marble and a wall of desert scenes. A coyote in moonlight, a storm shelf rolling over Rincon Peak, a close-up of a cholla bloom powdered with yellow dust. A woman at the front desk looked up with trained compassion and then away with trained discretion. I walked toward the glass doors that breathed out onto Congress Street. Grant kept pace, the envelope now creased in the middle. I can fix this, he said. We can talk like adults. We will, I said, just not on your terms. Outside, the air held the last warmth of the day. A bus hissed at the curb. Someone laughed under the portico and a server lit a ring of votive candles like he was counting prayers. I could see my car across the small lot, the old Ford that deserved a saint's medal. I reached for my keys. They chimed against each other modest bells. Grant stopped short, the words piling up behind his teeth. Who told you, he asked finally, as if the source mattered more than the thing itself. You've been... What, spying? Archiving, I said. It's different. He flinched. A man who relies on charm expects an argument he can win with volume or history. He doesn't expect a ledger. He doesn't expect the absence of adjectives. A gust tugged at the hotel flag and snapped it straight. I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear and glanced back through the glass to the ballroom door. From where I stood, I could see Ava's profile chin lifted, the professor leaning toward her with his hand flat steady on the table. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. "You don't have to make a scene," Grant said, although the scene had been his. He smoothed his tie, a habit, a reflex that told on his nerves. "Ava's night is Ava's night," I said. "We agree." We stood like that for a moment, a strange tableau. A husband with an opened envelope and nothing left to say. A wife with a ring she hadn't yet removed and a posture she hadn't used in years. The city sliding into evening around us. A biker rolled past with strings of LEDs laced through his spokes. The scent of creosote, faint from a storm days earlier, lifted off the landscaping like a memory you only notice when somebody names it. Grant lowered the envelope. "Who is it?" he asked, one more lunge for control. "Who did you hire?" "Someone who reads," I said. "Someone who listens." He set his jaw. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but not tonight." I walked to the Ford, opened the door, and sat. The seat was warm with stored sunlight. My hands rested at 10 and 2 while I let my breath even out. On the second exhale, I felt it, not triumph, not relief, something quieter that still had a spine. When I backed out, I checked my mirrors like a student driver, like somebody about to be graded, and turned toward home. Inside the ballroom, the trio found the tail of their song and tied it off. They would finish their set. Plates would be cleared and dessert would arrive, prickly pear sorbet in shallow bowls the color of ripe watermelon. Ava would be photographed by the neon sign because she had promised me. She keeps her promises. At a red light on Stone Avenue, a couple crossed holding hands, the woman carrying her shoes by their straps, the man laughing. I tapped the steering wheel with my thumb and watched the signal tick its slow geometry. When it changed, I eased through and left the Sonoran palms behind its lights dimming into the rear view until they became a small constellation and then nothing at all. I did not feel empty. I felt exact. The road home unspooled like a tape I could rewind without looking. Left at the mural with the javelina, right at the bakery that smells like cinnamon after dark, past the empty lot, where Palo Verdes hum with insects. I parked beneath our mesquite and sat with the engine ticking down. The porch light I'd set on a timer burned a small circle into the adobe wall, reliable, unromantic. I carried my black heels and the envelope's echo up the steps. Inside the house held the day's heat and our history in unequal portions. On the entry table, the family bowl took its usual hall keys receipts, a lonely paperclip. I added my own keys to the pile and walked to the kitchen. The counter reflected the under-cabinet lights, the same counter where I'd labeled school projects and cooled pies, where I'd once laid out maps for a road trip that never made it past Phoenix. I poured water, drank, and waited for the glass to sweat in my hand. When it didn't, I set it down and opened the drawer where we keep the little tools that make a life work: rubber bands, a hex key, a Sharpie, a roll of tape that always wanders off. The notebook lived where it had lived for months, under a stack of takeout menus, spiral-bound cheap, the color of dry sand. I pulled it free and flipped past the first pages, the ones where my handwriting had been careful, almost apologetic. They held dates that no longer needed gloss. The morning I smelled a perfume that wasn't mine baked into the passenger seat, a bright peppery scent I couldn't name. The afternoon, a folded receipt from a Scottsdale restaurant fell from the pocket of Grant's jacket, 2 entrees, a bottle that cost more than my first month's rent. The week I noticed a new debit to a credit union we didn't use. Each entry had numbers beside it, arrows, a small web growing more certain with each line. Archivists love the comfort of provenance. If you can track custody, who held a document, when, under what conditions you can say something true about what it is. I thought of that when I shifted from observation to collection. I photocopied statements when they arrived in the mail and scanned them on my lunch breaks, at the county archive when they didn't. I learned the rhythm of his transfers Fridays before noon, always just under a threshold that would have triggered alerts. I made a list of LLCs that bloomed suddenly in the state registry, companies named, with the Desserts Tongue, Saguaro Holdings, Ocotillo Development, Prickly & Co., with addresses that led to office parks and mail drops. One afternoon, Grant said he needed to meet a contractor in Catalina foothills. He left me with a kiss on the crown of my head, a habit long after the warmth that had made it natural. I waited 10 minutes, then took my old Ford north. Near a glossy condo complex with a courtyard fountain shaped like a fan of agave spears, I let the engine idle under the shade of a mesquite and fixed my eyes on the glass lobby. He appeared with Lexi, her hair smooth as if humidity had never been invented, carrying a white shopping bag with tissue paper bright as bougainvillea. He opened the passenger door of his truck for her. He had always performed courtesy like a man who knows where the camera is, even when there isn't one. That night, after he fell asleep to a travel show, I took the fireproof box from the closet, set it on the bed, and entered the combination. The smell of metal and paper slid out. The folder I wanted wasn't near the top. It had settled over the years, heavy with signatures and notary stamps behind the will that hadn't needed updating, and the deed that had made him feel real. I recognized the legal stationery even before I saw the title, Postnuptial Agreement 2002. The year his great-uncle died and left him a tract of Rancho del Oro that he swore we'd keep as a legacy. I read by lamplight, my finger tracing paragraphs until the legalese gave way to a sentence built with the kind of clarity lawyers save for things they truly mean. Fidelity, it said in effect for the duration of the marriage and extending through dissolution proceedings. Breach of fidelity results in forfeiture of claims to jointly held assets as enumerated herein. No sunset clause, no waltz out, waltz. The air in the room changed. Not cooler exactly, truer. I scanned the agreement and saved it to the secure drive I'd opened 2 months earlier under a name that would bore an auditor. I printed a copy and returned the original to the box, aligning the folder with its grain the way you settle a sleeping child back into a crib. The next weeks made a map I could draw with my eyes closed. Early mornings at the archive, a hum in the stacks where the air is kept drier than the rest of the building pages, turning under foam weights. Lunches spent across from a legal pad where I cataloged Grant's pattern in a hand that had graded essays and labeled photographs for decades. Evenings where he said he had to check a site and the garage door sewed a seam between us with its descending hum. I started to notice ink variations on printed bank confirmations, the way a line of digits sometimes sat a little higher, a little darker, evidence of a reprint after an edit. I didn't like the thrill that came with finding the irregularities, but I didn't distrust it either. I waited until I had enough to satisfy a woman who had spent her life telling other people enough about their own records. On a Thursday, I sat across from an attorney named Caroline Vega in a low building with lemon trees marching along the parking lot. Her office smelled like dust jackets and new carpet. Archivist, she said, scanning my outline, then the photocopies, then the flash drive. That makes my job easier. It makes mine harder, I said. She smiled without pity and got to work. She asked for clean chains of custody on the financial statements, a list of witnesses who had seen Grant with Lexi in contexts she'd call non-professional, and any audio that captured intent. We went through my notebook page by page, marking asterisks. She outlined our options, her pen underlining certain phrases that put air in my lungs. Emergency injunction, preliminary hearing, preservation of residence. The audio came later by accident. Grant had left his phone on the kitchen counter face down, a bad habit I'd learned not to read his invitation. A text chimed, then a second. Then the phone rang with Lexi's name. I didn't touch it. The call went to voicemail, then to a return call on speaker his. I was in the laundry room and the wall carried voices as walls do. Tonight he was saying light, pleased with the elegance of his own cruelty. Public pressure will keep her quiet. Lexi laughed, the small laugh she uses at ribbon cuttings. She has no idea about the money. I didn't move. I let the machine do what machines do, save. The morning of Ava's dinner, I wore flats to the courthouse because I refused to lose dignity to a staircase. The Pima County Superior Court building rises out of its plaza like a geometry lesson, angles, clean windows, mirrored, a flag making its own weather at the door. Caroline met me at security with a nod. At the clerk's window, we filed for dissolution and moved for a temporary financial restraining order. The clerk stamped our packet with the calm strength of someone who understands that paper changes lives more often than speeches do. We had a case number before 9. We had a preliminary date, a judge's name, and a copy of the order to serve. On the way home, I pulled into a strip mall where a sign promised notary services and made 3 certified copies. The woman behind the counter handled the pages like she was changing a dressing, gentle, efficient, unafraid of what it might look like underneath. I slid 1 copy into the envelope that would spend the afternoon in my purse. I placed the others in a file folder labeled with a name so dull I knew I'd never forget it. Back in the kitchen, I made coffee and tried to decide whether to eat. I opened the fridge and closed it, opened a window and closed it. I arranged napkins for dinner we'd never eat. At noon, the house phone rang with the particular insistence of a number that remembers your childhood. Miles. I told him enough. He said he was proud of my spine and would drive down after court opened in the morning. He didn't offer advice. He didn't need to. Grant came home at 2 to shower and change, whistling some tune from the radio, cheerful to the point of insult. I took my notebook to the bedroom and slid it under the takeout menus again, calm as placing a book back in the stacks. I showered and pinned my hair and considered for one long steady moment the face in the mirror and the shape of a life that would not tolerate being shaped by someone else. The call from Ava found me later when I was zipping the garment bag. "Mom, I'm here," I said. Her voice was held together but fragile at the seams. I tried to access the 529 last week, she said. For the fall deposit, the number is wrong. There's nearly nothing in there. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my palm flat to the quilt like I could steady the house from the roof down. Tell me exactly what you saw. She did. The amount. The dates. The way the account history had a blank stretch that didn't belong. She apologized once for bringing it up on her day, then corrected herself, then stopped apologizing at all. I'm coming over, she said after the dinner. Okay, I said. I took a breath, then another. In the closet, a dress waited on a hanger. In the kitchen, a stack of plates waited to be useful. The timer ticked toward the evening with the confidence of a metronome. I closed the garment bag, carried it to the door, and set it gently on the chair where we keep the mail. The house was quiet in the way a house is quiet before the next sound it will have to hold. I slept the way a document sleeps in a file, flat intact waiting. Morning found the house in a pale wash of desert light. By habit, I put coffee on, put plates away, folded a dish towel along its old crease. Miles texted just after 8. On my way, and I pictured his F-150 nosing past citrus trees, the dash held together with a strip of tape that had failed to hold anything else in its life. He let himself in with a knock that was mostly permission and held up a paper sack. From Lou's, he said, and set 2 waxed parcels on the counter. Waffles still steaming smelled like a childhood that involved less paperwork. We ate in a slow, practical quiet. His eyebrows did a thing they've done since I was 10, slanted up, then down a metronome of concern. You look like somebody who slept, he said finally. I did, I said. He rinsed his plate and returned it to the rack as if he lived there. You've got clean chains on all of this, he said, nodding toward the folder I had set on the table. If I were still on the bench, I'd be grateful for the clarity. Caroline was, I said. Good. He wiped his hands. If there's yelling today, you don't have to answer to it. Noted. He took a slow tour of the living room like a man reading a room, as if it were a text, what had been moved, what hadn't. He'll come here, he said, not as prediction, just as a fact. The furniture understood. He's going to try to bargain with you in the place where your memory is strongest. I looked at the couch where Ava had fallen asleep after finals, the wall with its steady parade of school pictures, a missing tooth, a borrowed blazer the year she dyed a pink streak, and we pretended it was a phase, so she wouldn't abandon it out of spite. I thought of the kitchen table of all the hands that had steadied themselves on its edge. I'll answer on paper, I said. He nodded, satisfied. Good. We worked the morning like a 2-person archive, he at the table with sticky notes and a yellow pencil, me at the counter with copies and a list. When my phone buzzed, I braced until I saw the name. Ava Study Group Brunch ran long. I'll be there after lunch. I love you. Love you, I typed to Hine. Back? I didn't tell her to hurry. I didn't tell her anything but the thing she needed. Around noon, the air thinned, as if the house had learned to inhale but not exhale. Gravel popped under tires outside. A door slammed with a decision. The knock rattled the wood. I answered. Grant stood with his chin set, the heat already pushing sweat to his hairline. Behind him, Lexi balanced confidence like a tray. Her silk blouse caught the light, and her gaze slid past me into the house the way people look at open houses they can't afford. We're coming in, Grant said, as if the words themselves were a key. You're standing on my threshold, I said, so I'll assume you're capable of manners. He took half a beat, then stepped inside, and Lexi followed on her narrow heels. Miles rose from the table without hurry. The old habit of the bench was in his posture, straight, not rigid, present, not pushing. Nora, Grant said, turning toward the kitchen where the folder lay. His eyes found the labeled tabs widened by the smallest degree moved on. He slapped papers of his own on the table. This is ridiculous. You're going to lift the freeze today. No, I said. You can't cut me off from my money, he said, the learning curve of consequences already making him blunter than usual. I've got obligations. So do I said. He gestured toward Lexi with an open hand. We have payroll, contractors. A ground break. Miles cleared his throat without making sound. Grant looked over, startled, as if remembering he wasn't alone with me. Who's this? My brother, I said. Miles Caldwell. Miles said, stepping forward and offering a hand. Grant didn't take it. Miles retracted his hand like a card returned to the deck. We can keep this civil, he said. We are civil, Grant, said his volume, arguing with his content. We're having a conversation in my house. In our house, I said, which courtesy of your signatures remains mine during proceedings? Lexi spoke for the first time, crisp. You filed this the day of your daughter's celebration, she said. Classy. You rehearsed a public exit during the same celebration, I said. You'll forgive me if I don't accept notes on etiquette. Her mouth pressed into a fine, expensive line. Grant smoothed his tie. This is not just about us, Nora, he said. It's about operations. You've frozen joint accounts that keep a company from functioning. That court order will be reviewed on the date listed, Miles said, still even. Until then, it stands. You can read it again if it helps. Grant's face colored. I don't take lectures from retired. Grant, I said and held up a palm. Stop. You came here to ask for access. I'm declining. Lexi's eyes flicked from the folder to the photos on the wall to the envelope still on the sideboard, where I'd set it the night before. What else is in there? She asked. Enough, I said. Enough for what she asked, as if the shape of the answer might fit in the space she'd left between us. Enough, I repeated. The front door opened on its own hinge. Ava, still in last night's dress under a denim jacket, stepped inside and saw the arrangement like a diorama: mother, father, brother, stranger. Her gaze landed on me, then on Grant, then on Lexi, with the kind of steadiness that turns a room into evidence. Hi, Mom, she said and kissed my cheek. Uncle Miles. Kiddo, Miles said, his voice softened by niece. Ava turned to her father. I need to see the 529 statement, she said. No tremor, no apology. Grant spread his hands. We can talk about that later. Now, she said. Lexi shifted. This isn't really... Ava looked at her. Who are you to us? She asked. It wasn't rude. It wasn't kind. It was tidy. Lexi, she said. I work with your father. Ava nodded once and returned to Grant. The statements. Ava, he said, reaching and treating her name like a placemat. He could slide under a mess, sweetheart. Don't, she said, and moved her arm out of range. The word landed like a bolt in a beam. He swallowed. There were market shifts, he said. We had to withdraw 4 times in 3 months, Ava said, in amounts that sit just under the bank's auto flag on Fridays before noon. She looked at me for half a second, enough to borrow a page from my calm, then back at him. Which part of the market is called Spa at the Phoenician? Lexi blinked. Grant's jaw worked and found nothing sturdy to stand on. I was going to replace it, he said. With what? Ava asked. The question was narrow and exact as a brad nail. He shifted again to strategy. Your mother is making this into a spectacle, he said. She escalated something that could have been the voicemail, I said quietly and set my phone on the table. You can both listen or you can keep talking over it. I don't mind either way. Grant's mouth flattened. Lexi's eyes sharpened. I tapped play. His voice filled the room, the same voice he had used to cut ribbons and reassure investors now stripped of stagecraft by proximity. Tonight, public pressure will keep her quiet. Lexi's laugh, then the sentence I didn't add adjectives to. She has no idea about the money. Ava didn't look at me while it played. She didn't look at him either. She listened. When the recording ended, she breathed in, breathed out, and turned her face toward Grant, the way you turn toward a light to decide if it's morning or a fire. I worked 2 jobs last semester, she said. You told me you couldn't help with study abroad because times were tight. Grant's shoulders sagged for a second and then reassembled his posture. I'm your father, he said, as if the word itself could fill the difference. And I'm your daughter, she said level. That used to mean something to you. Lexi spoke again, smaller. You told me it was all joint, she said to Grant carefully, like someone testing a step over water that isn't frozen. You told me we were building something side by side. Grant didn't answer quickly enough to save anything. It's complicated, he said. Is it? She asked. Miles cleared his throat, this time with sound. Grant, he said, since you're here in search of relief, here's what you have: a temporary order that holds until the preliminary hearing. A residence that remains with Nora, and a daughter requesting documents she has legal right to see. You don't get to, Grant began. I get to keep time, Miles said, tapping his watch face once with a finger the way a judge taps a gavel without striking. And the time you have here is nearly used up. Grant looked between us like there must be a corridor out of the scene we had made. He picked up the court packet he'd slapped down, realized he'd creased it beyond reuse, and set it down again. He turned toward me with a last bid at the currency he'd always found exchangeable. We've built a life, he said. We can keep it from breaking apart in front of strangers. We're in our living room, I said. People talk, he said. They do, I said. Often because rhetoric gives them less to hold than paper. Lexi lifted her purse from the chair where she'd placed it, the gesture elegant and final. I'm going to wait in the car, she said. To Grant, she added nothing else. The door clicked behind her. The sound left a clean slice through the air. Ava stood straighter. I want printouts, she said to her father. All of them. I want to see every transfer. He nodded, but it was the nod of a man promising a morning that has already passed. You can send them to Caroline, I said. Her email's in the packet. He took a step toward me. He must have believed was an overture. Don't do this, he said, the plea thin, then thinner, 30 years. We're not arguing about a number, I said. We're looking at a record. He flinched the way people do when their reflection refuses to flatter. Miles moved to the door, a host closing a visit that had spent itself. We're done, he said. You can call your lawyer. You can read your order. You can deliver documents you owe your child. Grant's jaw flexed. He gathered his papers, managed not to tear them further, and strode out without looking back. The screen slapped once against its frame and settled. Quiet arrived and stayed. It wasn't a peace. It was the absence of noise that had mistaken itself for necessity. Ava sat at the table. She put both hands flat on the wood and stared at her fingers as if they belonged to someone she used to be. "I'm okay," she said, testing the words for structure. "I'm okay." "Okay," I said. Miles busied himself with the kettle in the way men of his generation apologize for a world they didn't break. He set mugs down with the gravity of offerings. "Peppermint?" he asked. "Please," Ava said, her voice smaller than the room. We drank, the three of us facing the folder that had divided the air. Ava lifted the top page, scanned 2 lines, set it down. "I don't need to see all of it," she said. "Not right now." "You don't," I said. She nodded and stood and crossed the room to the wall of photos. Her gaze moved across the years like a fingertip along a map. Birthday candles, a paper crown, her arm slung around Grant's shoulders the day they built the geology project in our driveway. I watched her do the arithmetic of meaning without subtracting herself. Miles glanced at his watch. "I'll go pick up lunch," he said, the pretext transparent and useful. "Lose again. They've got those turkey sandwiches with green chile." "Thanks," I said. When he left the house, exhaled. Ava came back to the table and slid into the chair beside mine. She pinched the bridge of her nose, then let her hand fall. "I don't want to cry," she said. "You don't have to," I said. She laughed, once dry as the yard. I might anyway. We let the possibility live without tending it. The clock on the mantel found its quarter hour and chimed with soft politeness. Outside, a lawn cruise blower stitched a seam of sound down the block. Inside, the folder sat with its tabs like a book I had already read but might have to cite. Ava reached across and took my hand. Her palm was warm, her grip certain. "I'm here," she said. "I know," I said. The front door eased open again without drama. Miles's boots marked the threshold like quotation marks. He set a paper sack down, opened the fridge, found plates. He worked as if the day were a patient thing with instructions. We ate at the table with the paperwork to one side, the way families make room for casseroles and science projects and grief. No one declared anything. No one tried to rename the facts. The food did ordinary duties. The house remembered how to hold us. When the plates were stacked and the sink had done what it could, I returned the folder to the center of the table and squared it to the grain. Ava squared her shoulders to match. Miles set his mug down, then moved it half an inch so the ring wouldn't stain. The afternoon light shifted along the floorboards. We didn't chase it. We let it move. The afternoon lengthened without asking our permission. Miles stacked the plates, rinsed the knives, and left the counters neat in a way that expected more living. When the door closed behind him for his second trip to Luz, the house held its quiet like a held breath and then let it go. By evening, Ava had gone back to her apartment to change, and to gather the courage people keep in the drawers with their socks. I walked the rooms without agenda, our bedroom, the hallway lined with frames, the den with the one chair that has finally learned my back. The folder sat centered on the kitchen table. I set my hand on it and felt beneath my palm paper and weight. Morning arrived in a color that doesn't belong to paint the desert's chalk blue, dry and promising nothing. I wore the flats again. I pinned my hair without dramatics. Miles pulled up at 8, the F-150 shouldering the curb like an old friend. Ava came separately, a blazer over a plain dress. Her mouth set in a way that meant she would not let it tremble. We didn't rehearse. We gathered. Pima County Superior Court stands like a tidy problem that has already solved itself. The Plaza Stones kept their own counsel. A man in a suit fed quarters to a meter, a woman in scrubs crossed the street with a coffee that steamed into the cool. Caroline met us inside the revolving door, her briefcase a shade darker than confidence. "Good morning," she said as if it were. "Morning," I said. We cleared security with the familiar choreography watch in the tray phone, in the tray keys in the tray, and rode the elevator with a clerk who said nothing, and a man who whispered to his tie. The courtroom assigned to us wore the same wood every courtroom wears, sober, clean, finished. The seal took up the wall behind the bench, the way a memory takes up a family. On the second row, 2 men from Rotary fiddled with their programs, as if a program could translate a day like this into an event with intermission. Grant entered from the side door with a lawyer barely old enough to rent a car without the fee. The man's suit jacket had the hang of something bought for a funeral that wasn't his. Lexi wasn't there. In the small chatter before the clerk called us to order someone at the back, said her first name and then quieted as if they'd bumped a pane of glass and remembered it could break. "All rise," the bailiff said. The judge took her seat with the practice of a person who understands furniture. Honorable Teresa Martinez, cut hair, clean collar, eyes like the good kind of audit. She took the file from the clerk, flipped to the tab that mattered, read, while the room learned what silence can carry. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, and my name on the record made a line under the morning. "Mr. Mercer." "Yes, Your Honor," we said each from our own table. Caroline rose and the light favored her. "Your Honor." We moved to maintain the temporary restraining order on joint assets, to preserve the residence for my client during proceedings, and to admit the exhibit packet as marked. Grant's young lawyer Parker stood too quickly and tugged his jacket straight too late. Your Honor, if I may, we intend to challenge the underlying postnuptial on grounds of timeliness and relevance. It was executed decades ago. Judge Martinez didn't look at him yet. She turned one page, then another. Section 14. Subsection C. She read the cadence not theatrical but exact. Fidelity clause in effect for the duration of the marriage extending through dissolution proceedings. Forfeiture of claims to joint assets upon breach. She raised her head. Counselor timeliness applies to milk and to coats, less often to contracts you still live inside. Parker flushed to his credit like a person who knows when a door is not for him. Your Honor, we also contend that the audio recordings, made in the marital home without coercion, Caroline said, already on her feet. They speak to intent and to the pattern Mr. Mercer established. Admitted, Judge Martinez said, and nodded to the clerk who marked the exhibit with a pen that clicked like a period. Parker regrouped. We request at minimum that my client have access to funds for ongoing business obligations. Payroll. Construction timelines. Caroline answered before I could decide whether anger had a use. Your Honor, the order already allows Mr. Mercer access to his personal account for necessities. What he calls business obligations are entangled with the conduct at issue. The judge set the file down and folded her hands. Mr. Mercer, she said, addressing Grant directly, not unkindly, and not as a favor. You have executed a post-nuptial agreement. You have participated in transfers that on their face appear designed to evade scrutiny. This court is not in the habit of rewarding design. The temporary order remains. The residence remains with Mrs. Mercer for the duration of proceedings. You will retain access to your personal account for basic needs. She paused. By basic, I mean what the word has meant since dictionaries were invented. A murmur traveled from the second row to the last and died under the bailiff's look. Grant's jaw worked. Parker put a hand to his sleeve, a small reminder of choreography. Caroline stood again. Your Honor, we ask that the court direct Mr. Mercer to produce full statements for the 529 college account ending in 27, including all withdrawals, directed Judge Martinez said. 10 days? Grant stared at the table as if numbers might rise from the wood and rescue him. He was not used to being asked to bring receipts he hadn't written himself. Anything further, the judge asked. No, Your Honor, Caroline said. Parker lifted his palms, then lowered them. No, Your Honor. Then we are adjourned, Judge Martinez said, and the gavel's small report put a line under the mourning. Outside the plaza took us back without care for our paperwork. The flag cracked once against its pole indifferent. Miles breathed out through his nose. Straight call, he said. Caroline's smile was measured. We'll get the production. We'll track the transfers cleanly. She squeezed my elbow, a professional human pressure. You did your job before I did mine. Ava stood with her arms folded, not defensive, contained. Thank you, she said to Caroline, and the lawyer nodded as if thanked daily by daughters who have to learn this posture too soon. We parted on the sidewalk. Caroline headed for the garage. Parker hurried after Grant toward the curb, speaking with the fervor of a man trying to outrun his own notes. A couple from church crossed our path and pretended to be studying the pigeons. A developer I recognized from 2 of Grant's old luncheons stood beneath the jacaranda and found a reason to call someone else. By late afternoon, the ruling had done the thing rulings do in a small city with long echoes. The hairdresser at June's leaned in and whispered over the dryer. The Rotary group text lit up with a reminder about discretion that ensured none. In the grocery aisle, a woman I only knew from school fundraisers touched my forearm and said, "If you need anything," in the tone of someone who had to practice saying that sentence to her mirror. I thanked her and bought peppermint tea. Back home, the house recognized us. Miles hung his jacket on the hook he always misses the first time and landed it on the second like a shot to the center of a ring. Ava towed off her flats and lined them up beside mine as if they'd been negotiating territory for years. I put water on, food I asked. Later, Ava said, and sank into the couch with a closeness you can't perform. She leaned her head back and stared at the ceiling as if it might offer a clean copy of the day. Miles opened the blinds 2 inches and then 2 more until the light reached the bookshelf. The afternoon didn't ask to stay, it simply did. The phone started its second life. A neighbor called to say a for lease sign had gone up on the corner, space that used to sell imported candies, the adobe front with the green door that sticks in summer. She wanted to know whether I'd seen it. I said yes, even though I hadn't, because I could see it anyway. The sun-faded awning, the banged-up bell above the door that rings like a coin, the window shelf where someone once displayed jars of unusual licorice. After we hung up, I remembered the way the space smelled on hot days, sugar and dust, and thought idly of chairs. By evening, the callers changed investors phoning our landline and discovering I do, in fact, answer. A man from a supplier asking whether someone named Lex would still be approving invoices. A polite voice from a local paper leaving a number instead of the questions. I let most of it slide to the machine and listened to their careful phrasing collecting behind the beep. The men from Rotary would be discussing lunch menus and reputations with the same weight. The doorbell startled the dog we don't have. Miles glanced at me and I at Ava. I opened the door to find Mrs. Calder from 3 houses down in a cardigan the color of glaciers. She held a foil-wrapped rectangle in both hands, like an instrument too delicate to tune. "I baked," she said. "It's not much." "It's something," I said, accepting the weight. She hesitated, then put her hand against the doorframe, gentle the way people touch stone before they say a prayer. "They were saying things at church," she said. "About your husband, about the clause." The words sat awkwardly in her mouth, a guest at the wrong party. "I don't listen to everything, but I do listen to you if you need an ear." "Thank you," I said. When she left the house, held the borrowed smell of cinnamon and nutmeg. Ava lifted a corner of foil and smiled with a restraint that looked like relief wearing good clothes. We ate on napkins, our plates not up to the task of gratitude. Later, while Maya, the cat from next door, who treats our porch as a jurisdictional suggestion, sat on the sill and swished her disapproval, I stepped onto the front walk. The street was somewhere between quiet and not. Sprinklers hissed, a teenager bicycle clicked his freewheel at the corner, a couple walked a dog who had decided to lead. Across the way, the porch light at the ranch house popped on and held. I thought of the courtroom's clean wood and the sound of the gavel like a pebble dropped into a well. I thought of Ava's shoulders, how they had squared without orders. I thought for a minute that got to be more than a minute of things I had once believed would never change, and then watched change anyway, one page at a time. Inside, the kettle clicked itself off. Miles poured without overspill. Ava drifted back to the photo wall and studied a picture where she stood barefoot on a cooler, while Grant steadied a kite string, both of them looking up. She didn't take it down. She didn't turn it face first. She let it stay where memory could find it and not trip. Night assembled itself. The blinds made their neat ladder. We stacked forks. We loaded the dishwasher with the care people spend on temples. The phone stopped pretending to be important. From somewhere on the next street, a guitar started and started again. When the last mug was rinsed and set to dry, I wiped the table and put the folder in the center aligned to the edge. Ava slid a sticky note beneath the top tab and labeled it with a number hers. Miles ran a dish towel over his hands until they were dry by any standard. The air from the swamp cooler found its slow path through the vents and laid a ribbon of cool across the room. We sat with what the day had made. The house which had lived through our countless ordinary hours learned a new one and kept it. Morning carried the clean edge of a day that meant only itself. We dressed without commentary, Ava in the same blazer Miles, in a tie he tied like he'd never learned to be afraid of knots, me in the flats that had already done their duty. The courthouse steps rose with the same geometry, each tread worn by shoes that had come for endings and for inventory. Inside, the courtroom felt smaller than before, as if the first hearing had taken a measured breath and this one let it out. Caroline arranged her files, then looked at me and nodded once. The clerk called the case. The bailiffs, all rise, drew us to our feet like a string through the center of the room. Judge Martinez took the bench. No robe ever carried itself better. No chair ever looked less like permission. She scanned the stack in front of her tabs, like flags in a terrain we had already crossed. Grant sat 2 tables away, thinner around the jaw, his cuff riding high enough to show the pale band where a watch had lived. Parker whispered, then stopped, recognizing the pointlessness of decorating a decision. "Good morning," the judge said. Papers settled, throats cleared. "I have reviewed the submitted discovery, including bank statements, the formation documents for the various limited liability companies, and the audio exhibits previously admitted. I have read the postnuptial agreement in full. I have considered counsel's arguments." She turned a page. "The findings are straightforward. The fidelity clause in Section 14 remains in effect during the marriage and extends through dissolution. Breach has been established by credible evidence. Transfers from joint accounts to entities under Mr. Mercer's control support a pattern inconsistent with transparency and in several instances correlate directly with withdrawals from the college savings plan ending in 27. A line formed where my hand gripped the table edge. I loosened it. Ava sat very still, eyes forward, a student learning a language that would never forget her. The division of property, Judge Martinez continued, will reflect both the agreement's terms and equitable considerations. The residence remains with Mrs. Mercer. Retirement accounts titled in her name remain with her. Joint investments are divided 70% to Mrs. Mercer, 30% to Mr. Mercer. Mr. Mercer retains his personal effects in any separate property established before the marriage or by clear tracing. She paused not for drama but for record. Mr. Mercer is ordered to produce complete documentation for the college account within 10 days, and to restore from his separate funds withdrawals identified as misapplied. Parker half rose, then sat. Grant's mouth opened as if to form a sentence that had no lawful subject. The judge lifted her eyes. Objections were heard in briefing, she said. The order stands. The gavel touched wood with a sound that was neither loud nor soft. It was sufficient. We didn't cheer. The room isn't built for that. Caroline squeezed my hand quick, dry, exact. Miles drew a long breath through his nose, then let it out as if setting a weight down where it could rest. Ava's fingers closed around the edge of her folder, and the paper didn't bend. Outside the plaza had the decency to be ordinary. Pigeons worked their opinions into the shade. A bus sighed. Caroline recapped next steps in a voice that adjusted to the open air. We'll track compliance, she said. We'll file if we must. For now, go home. Grant walked by within arm's reach, looking everywhere but at us. Boopus. A tremor lived in his jaw. Lexi did not appear. Parker touched his elbow. The gesture failed to carry meaning. We drove back down Stone with the windows cracked an inch to let the day in. At a red light, a boy crossed with a cello case bigger than his back. The world kept its schedule a relief disguised as traffic. At home, the house accepted us again. I set the court copy on the kitchen table and squared it to the grain. Ava leaned in, reading not because she doubted, but because she preferred the company of words that matched behavior. Miles opened the cabinet, where we keep the good glasses, and poured water like it might be wine. We drank. The taste wasn't victory. It was cold. By afternoon, the phone had stopped inventing emergencies. A neighbor texted a photo of the corner storefront with the for lease sign, sun-faded at the edges. I walked over with Ava while Miles pretended the sink needed a judge. The adobe front wore a green door that stuck with a familiar complaint, and a bell that chimed like a coin tapped with a fingernail. Inside, dust motes rehearsed their slow ballet. Shelves lined the walls, bowed in the middle where jars had once argued with gravity. The air smelled like sugar that had learned to be patient. We paced off the room without speaking, 10 strides by 8, an alcove that wanted a chair, a back counter that would listen to cups being set down. Ava ran her palm along a shelf and drew a line through dust as straight as a ruler. It's good wood, she said, and smiled without showing teeth. Back outside, the sun hit the stucco at an angle that made it look new. We crossed to the shade, then back to the light, as if testing where the day held better. At home, Miles held up a set of keys I didn't recognize. The agent left a lockbox, he said. She said you can take your time. We ate on the porch steps, paper plates balanced on our knees, the kind of dinner that improves when air moves. Across the street, Mrs. Calder waved from her yard and returned to her roses. A kid practiced skateboard ollies and landed one clean enough to earn his own grin. The light thinned but didn't argue about it. Inside, we cleared the table and let the dishwasher do its soft calculus. I slid the court order into a clear sleeve and filed it in the drawer where important paper stays available to fingers that know where to look. The notebook, spiral-bound cheap, the color of dry sand, went beside it. I closed the drawer and rested my hand flat on the wood. Ava drifted to the photo wall again and stopped at the picture with the kite. She stood there a long moment. When she turned back, her face had the settled look of someone who knows where a thing belongs. She came to the table, reached for a pen, and wrote a phone number on a sticky note. She pressed it to the corner of the sleeve. In case you need the clerk, she said. Same department as before. Thank you, I said. Miles rose, fetched his jacket, and missed the hook on the first try. On the second, it caught. He grinned at the small rightness of it and let the door ease shut behind him. The house slowed to its evening rhythm. The swamp cooler found its lane. The blinds made their patient ladder. The cat next door flicked her tail at a moth that refused to cooperate. I stood at the sink and watched the yard shift from color to outline. The porch light came on square and dependable. When I turned back, Ava had set 3 cups on the counter without asking which ones. I filled them. We sat with our hands around warm porcelain and let the day become the kind that can be remembered without translation. On the table, the clear sleeve held its pages like a pane of glass holds a sky. The door was closed. The door would open. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.